In this episode, we're going to go on a far, far journey, a virtual one, of course. We're going to start with Easter Island to see how a small expedition led to the discovery of one of the most important biological pathways in the human body. Then we're going to go to Ecuador to meet a small group of people who can eat whatever they want and they don't get sick like diabetes and cancer. Yes, you heard me right. They don't get the common diseases we do, the chronic diseases. Hi, this is Dr. Imad, and welcome back to another episode from Health and Nature. And as you can see, I'm filming here. I'm actually filming on top of the roof of our house. And my father, may his soul rest in peace, started to build this house in the early 80s, and then around 1987 we moved out to this house. We moved in, and I did a small tour around on the roof, balcony, and in the garden, and let's see what I encountered. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this small tour around the house. And if you're wondering about the scorpion, don't worry, I moved it to a safer place. So any animals I encounter that are not supposed to be or are a danger, I just move them to a safer place. So let's get back to our main topic of this video. Today's video, I'm going to explain why animal protein could be harmful. In the previous episodes, I explained how meat protein was essential to our survival. And so how can it be kind of unhealthy? It's kind of a contradiction. In order for you to understand what I want to explain, there are a few biological pathways that it's good to have a simple basic understanding of what they do in the human body. Then you're more likely to do the recommendations I say or you read later on. It'll just make more sense to you and you'll know why you're doing it, because a lot of the times you get recommendations from here and there, healthcare professionals, doctors, nutritionists, but you don't know why you're doing it and you simply start doing it and you quit because it doesn't make sense. Anyway, as I said, we're going to start with Easter Island. So just a quick history. Easter Island is inhabited by the Polynesians, and it was discovered by a Dutch explorer named Jacob Rogavia on Easter Sunday 1722. So it has nothing to do with Easter. It just coincided that he discovered it on Easter Sunday. And it's a World Heritage ordered by Chile, and it's famous for its archaeological ruins, which have like around 900 monumental statues called moai. I haven't been there. If anybody's been there, let us know in the comments. Now, in 1972, a Canadian researchers from McGill University went on an expedition there, and they got some soil samples. And they found a bacterium species that secretes a compound to stop the growth of competitive fungi and to absorb as many nutrients for itself. So they found an antifungal. No big deal. But later research and more extensive research proved that this compound has a lot more to it than just an antifungal. Now, they call this substance rapamycin. It's in honor of the name of the island, the native name of the island. In the literature, in the scientific literature, you'll find it either rapamycin or sirolimus. There are going to be a few medical terminology in this episode. You don't really have to memorize them. I just mention them in case somebody wants to do their own research and dig deeper, because I try to make things as simple as possible. You just have to understand their function. And it's not hard. You're going to see. I'm going to try to explain it as simple as possible. So again, rapamycin had properties acting like an antibiotic, antifungal, immunosuppressive effect, and it possessed tumor suppressive attributes. So it suppresses cancer cells. And so from Canada, a sample was sent to the National Cancer Institute in the United States. They tested it, and it did so well at inhibiting cancer cells that they advanced it as a priority for research and development. So they were so impressed with the rapamycin, how it suppressed the cancer cells, and from there just hundreds and hundreds of experiments exploded on rapamycin. Eventually, making a long story short, this led in about 1994 to the discovery of something called mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin. So not to get too technical, I'm going to use the word mTOR, like the abbreviation. Basically what you have to know is mTOR is a biological pathway that signals the body to grow, meaning in the anabolic phase, to grow cells. It's just a signal. It's good times, we have a lot of energy, food, and grow. So your cells start to proliferate, your body builds whatever it needs to do from bones, neurons, muscles, etc., etc. And rapamycin, the substance, targets that mTOR and it inhibits it. Okay? So we have a biological pathway in the body called mTOR that signals the body to grow. Rapamycin, the substance they discovered from Easter Island, it inhibits mTOR. Just remember that. It'll make sense to you later. Now, the biological pathway, mTOR, is a complex of proteins, but they found it in every single living organism. It's not in humans. It's everywhere, including yeast, flies, worms, any living creature. So it's a very, very essential biological pathway since the start of time, evolution, whatever you want to call it. So mTOR is a master regulator of cell growth and metabolism, okay? And just as a side note, just to mention that rapamycin actually in the lab extended the life of every living thing tested on it. So they tested it on mice and extended their life. They didn't get sick, and they didn't get diabetes or cancer. And it's very easy to induce these diseases in the lab in mice. And even on yeast, it extended their life. So it's a very, very potent anti-aging substance. So now we're going to go to Ecuador to meet a small group of people, as I said, who don't get sick, and we're going to tie it into what I mentioned about Easter Island or mTOR, really. So there's a small group of people, they're called Laron syndrome. These people were first discovered in the 50s. A Jewish pediatrician, he was an endocrinologist, pediatric endocrinologist. In the 1950s, he got a few kids which had stunted growth. And usually it's a lack of growth hormone. So he gave them growth hormone, but it didn't work. They didn't grow. And so there was something beyond that. And eventually around 300 to 500 people around the world were discovered to have this syndrome, this stunted growth. And the first Jewish doctor was called Zvi Laron, so they were named after him, and it's called Laron syndrome. So these people have they're actually dwarfism, and they can eat whatever they want, and they don't get sick. Later on, scientists were able to measure the growth hormone in the blood of Laron syndrome people, and they found growth hormone to be elevated and not low as they expected it. So eventually it turned out to be that they lacked, it's a genetical mutation, where they found that the people had a defect in a specific receptor in the liver that is supposed to bind to growth hormone and produce a substance called insulin-like growth factor, IGF-1. Remember this word IGF-1? It's a insulin-like growth factor. It's a growth factor. The growth hormone is supposed to go to the liver. There it has receptors where it kind of does a biological reaction, and it produces something called IGF-1. That's all you have to know. So in puberty, like people when they're growing, the IGF-1 has to be very, very high. And later on in life, it kind of settles down because you don't need to grow as much. You just need to maintain your weight, muscle mass. And Laron syndrome people have very, very low IGF levels since birth and throughout puberty, and of course throughout maturation. In 2011, a group of researchers from the U.S. National Institute on Aging and the University of Southern California on the Longevity Institute published a paper showing that after 22 years of following the Ecuadorian cohort, the Laron syndrome people in Ecuador, they had no cases of disease despite 20% of them being obese, and they had like no diabetes or anything. One single case of non-lethal cancer. It's scientifically insignificant or statistically insignificant. One case, non-lethal, so we can actually consider it as being there. And what they found in the Laron people in their blood, they all had low expression of mTOR. So mTOR, the biological pathway which gives the body the signal to grow, it's suppressed in the Laron people. So that's why they don't grow. But why don't they get sick? If mTOR is so important for growth and development. Okay, now, so let's try to put this all together. So you have mTOR, which is triggered by IGF-1. IGF-1 is triggered by insulin. Insulin is triggered by two things. Carbohydrates, mainly. Carbohydrates and protein, animal protein. Yes, that's where animal protein could be harmful. Because, as we said, the Laron people, they have suppressed mTOR, and that's why they're immune to diseases. So mTOR in excess is actually carcinogenic. That's the conclusion eventually. IGF-1, mTOR, they all stimulate each other. And so in puberty, you want to stimulate mTOR for optimal growth and development, but later on in life, you just want to maintain it. We, on the other hand, because we have so much processed carbohydrates year-round and too much meat year-round, which is unnatural, mTOR is always high. We're always in the signal of proliferation, so growth. And really, what is cancer? Cancer is the uncontrolled growth of cells. It's just you're giving the signal to your body to grow, 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 grow. There's a balance between mTOR and autophagy. I'm going to go into autophagy in the next episode because it'll be too long. And you want to strike that balance between the two, then it's actually useful. But if you're always high on mTOR, always high, always giving the signal to grow, that's where things start to get out of control. And that's why, let's say, the blue zones, which if you remember my second episode where I talked about the blue zones, they eat very little when they're mature, of course. They eat very little meat protein. And so their expression of mTOR is just occasional. And that's what you want to maintain your muscle mass as an adult. So even a good thing, such as organic or wild meat, if you eat too much of it, it becomes unhealthy. Now, as I said, modern life gives us this access to too much food, where really, if we go back just a few hundred years ago, we didn't have this luxury, and we had a lot of periods of famine, very little food, so mTOR was suppressed, and we lived like that for thousands of years. Even in the wildlife, the animals, there's a period of a lot of food, and they grow and develop, and then there's a period of low food, and so mTOR isn't expressed. Okay, in the end, I hope this made sense to you. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about autophagy, the process that opposes mTOR, and how people who don't have Laron syndrome don't also get sick. Again, we're going to go back to the blue zones a little bit. So it's not like we're doomed and we want to have the Laron syndrome. But if you want any private consultation on nutrition, on health, shoot me an email on the email below. If you just want to support the channel, you can go to the link, buy me a coffee. Until next time, stay tuned. This is Dr. Ahmad Alhamra.